Hello. This will be your second curriculum based activity that you're working on for the remainder of this week. This is going to take a couple days to do, and the due date for this will be Friday by midnight, please. So, what you're going to do is you're going to watch a documentary series called The Century, the Best Years, and you're going to fill in some movie notes. I will talk about the directions in a second, but I also want to draw your attention to something as what I call supplemental. So, this is a note taking activity what I would normally give about the start of the Cold War and how the early events of the Cold War impacted Americans. Normally, there's an essential question which you can ignore, but I would encourage that you actually read through these notes. They're going to go over aspects of what is the Cold War. It's going to define some terminology that I'm going to use and expect you to know. There's a brief understanding of what happened after World War II. There's a slide that discusses the setup of the UN and what its purpose is. And then down at the bottom, it talks about what the UN actually became used for during the Cold War. There's a discussion of some of the breakdown of diplomatic negotiations between Stalin and Truman that occurred in the years right before the end of World War II into the aftermath. There's two slides that discuss the economic beliefs and the concerns of the Soviets versus the United States, which led to this increased tension between the two sides that would eventually lead to this war that would last for 40 years. It goes into foreign policy determinations, which is the satellite nation versus containment. This would have impacts on us taking part in politics in countries all over the world, including countries like Korea, Vietnam, Iran, Afghanistan, countries that you've probably heard of today. All of these countries' influences and relationship with the United States, Cuba, have to do with the Cold War era. So we're going to look at that. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan are defined. Their Marshall Plan is discussed in the video, but this gives you a little overview of what it is. This slide is a breakdown of where the money was distributed to the countries of Europe that took the Marshall Plan. This is a really cool site if you want to check it out. It's the USAID Foreign Aid Explorer, and what it actually does to connect to what we're talking about from the 50s. So, from 1952, really, after the establishment of the Marshall Plan, the United States increase of foreign aid over the entire globe increased exponentially. And today, mass amount of our taxpayer dollars actually goes to paying for different aspects of different countries. And so what this does is it actually breaks it down by sector of where the monies actually go to. And then it shows you what departments contribute money to that particular sector. And then beyond that, it also shows the amount of money that America gives to each of these countries. And so if you kind of toggle over the country, it shows you the breakdown through fiscal years. It breaks it apart by decades. So this is the decade right now of 2001, to 2020. And then from 2020, it'll start to change and shift. But what's kind of cool is you can kind of get a glimpse of how our foreign aid today, where we're paying in the billions, of where that money actually goes to. And some correlations with why we're doing that will be made as we talk about the Cold War. So once again, if you open up this slideshow, you'll get access to that and you can click on it. It goes into the discussion of the creation of NATO, which is still an organization that exists today. Its purpose was to stop the spread of communism, but today its purpose is to stop the spread of terrorism. It's a controversial organization and one that you'll hear our current president talk about in a way that shows that controversy. This is a map that shows the breakup of Germany after World War II. You'll notice where Berlin is actually located. So when it talks about the Berlin blockade, this is why Stalin wanted the Western powers out. And then eventually, when Stalin passes away, a man by the name of Nikita Khrushchev takes over the Soviet Union and builds what is the very famous Berlin Wall, which is actually built in this sector. You're going to then look at the Warsaw Pact. If you want to read about that, it's not mentioned in the video, but it's Stalin's reaction to what is NATO and kind of a drawing on both sides, a line in the sand to stop the spread of communism in one direction and democracy in the other. And then finally, there's a map that shows the break apart of the democratic nations of NATO versus the members of what is known as the Warsaw Pact. And the countries, you'll notice the different colorings, and the color key is up here. As you look at it, open the slideshow and you'll see it. And then the Iron Curtain that's mentioned by Winston Churchill in the first part of the video is the line between what is the Soviet Union and the democratic powers of Western Europe. Okay. Once again, if you read this over, it'll give you a quick refresher or a quick overview of the Cold War era, and then you can get into the movie notes. It will make a little more sense. So this is your task. You're going to be given next week, the start of next week, our early part of the week will actually have you examine this question that I've highlighted. How did the Cold War era impact American opportunity? And once again, complete the opportunity task first, because this will make sense into how you should analyze these notes. You're going to watch 3 video clips, about 45 minutes total, and you're going to take notes based on categories given to you. In the box, I've actually given you a model of how you should take your notes. This is going to count as a formative grade, but you're going to pull these as specs and analysis. So if you take crappy notes, you're probably going to have a pretty subpar writing piece, which will impact your summative grade. So be mindful of that. I did put a reminder of what a spec should include. It's details with statistics, names, and a thorough explanation, dates, places, anything that's given to give a full picture of this topic. And then I'm going to also give you a recommendation, but I want to show you the model of the specs first. So I actually did the first one for you. I took notes on the Iron Curtain, and you're going to notice that I put a pretty exhaustive amount of notes here. I put when it happened, where the speech was given. Winston Churchill came to the United States to give a very famous speech in Fulton, Missouri, which was actually the President Harry Truman's hometown in March of 1946. During the speech, Churchill said that from the Baltic to the Adriatic, a figurative Iron Curtain has descended on Europe. And if you think back to that map that I just showed you a second ago, it's the separation of Eastern and Western Europe. And so basically what Churchill was saying, that was a man by the name of Joseph Stalin was in charge, and he was a tyrant, and that Eastern Europe was under Soviet control, and the war technically wasn't over yet until Stalin was defeated. When Stalin heard the speech, he saw this as an act of war, and this actually led to tensions between the US and Soviet Union. It would ultimately lead to the Cold War, which would last for 40 years. So you notice with my notes, this is all from the video, and you're going to hear it as you listen to the video. All of this is kind of mentioned. I put it into quick bullets to show the specs. And when I go to write, I will take this information and put it into a well-developed specs. I'm actually going to use this as a model when I teach you how to write next week. I'm going to use the Iron Curtain as my model. Now, the other suggestion that I have, as you type these notes, this comment will not be in the worksheet that you're given, but I wanted to show you how I would do this. After I finish each specs, I would pause. I would actually pause the clip, and I would ask myself the 2 questions that I told you to ask yourself earlier. What kind of opportunity is being impacted here through American opportunity? And in my mind, because we're dealing with global leaders, Stalin, Churchill, and Truman, I believe it's political. And then I ask myself, is it a gain or a loss? Now, I will say this again. There is not a right or wrong. You could actually argue both sides, which actually makes you a better historical analysis. But in my mind, I just wanted to show you the example. I put loss. So and then I would put, the reason why you're doing this is you're actually prepping your analysis statement. So I'm analyzing the specs. I'm saying it's a political opportunity loss. And this is my because. Government leaders' words increased tensions between US leadership and Soviet leadership and led to a Cold War that could put American lives at risk. And I might just edit that a little bit. I spelled the word lead wrong and I need to fix it. So, and that was what I would do off to the side. So as you take your notes, what I would recommend doing, this is totally a suggestion and not required. You can actually start analyzing the specs and deciding your type of opportunities that you're going to focus on. For the writing next week, I'm going to ask you to narrow it to a few, but these notes are going to serve as part of your Comp 2 grade for that writing piece. So the work that you're creating is not just going to be meaningless, and it's not going to be without substance. We will also come back to these facts again for another extended writing piece for the entire decade or era. So they're not just going to be a one-time use and then we're done type of situation, because you also may use them on your final writing summative as well. So just as a reminder, your specs, what I am grading are the specs and the thoroughness of the explanation of the specs. So I've given you a model for what I expect to see. Some of them are not going to be this long, but you really need to describe what it is. I cannot stress that enough. Like, don't just say it was a law passed for veterans for the GI Bill of Rights. Specifically, what did it do? American post-war economy. Some of these are pretty broad categories, but I expect you to explain, what does that mean? What was it like in the economy? Levittown, who created it? What was it for? How big were the houses? There is a man who talks about his experience moving in with his family. I would encourage you to put his name down. The baby boom. It gives a statistic in years of numbers. Give that, please. There's a category on African Americans. What was it like for World War II returning veterans? What was Truman's civil rights and what happened in baseball, etc. The Berlin blockade is not outright said, but when it starts to talk about Berlin and Stalin closing off Berlin, that's the blockade. And then the Berlin airlift, once again, it's not called the Berlin airlift necessarily openly in the video, but it's going to describe American and British pilots doing something over Berlin, which is the airlift. Be mindful, like for instance, the Korean War, make sure you fully explain the war from beginning to end, not just what led to it. And then the events of the Red Scare, this is a definition. The Red Scare was the increased panic and fear in the United States of communist spread, of taking over our country. And so you're not having to take notes there. I just wanted to define that for you. And then under that, this is where you'll take the notes from the video in relation to it. So read them carefully, and that will help you. The questions go in order. There's no trickery here. It doesn't jump around. I want to put them in order. My intention is not to have you jump around and try to figure stuff out. It's instead collecting specs. And then as you collect them off to the side, I would encourage for each specs to do this comment for yourself. You just highlight a section of the specs and you'll notice that little comment bar comes up. If you click it, you can add a comment, and that will just help you for your analysis. You're actually prepping for your writing before you're even doing it. So just be mindful of that. Okay, and once again, the analysis is based on this question. This will be your first summative writing question. How did the Cold War era impact American opportunity? So you're taking the two activities, the opportunity activity and this activity together for a summative task we're going to do next week. And all of this is due by Friday. Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to help in any way. If you want me to open, I will be opening your docs Thursday and Friday and giving feedback as you work. All right, good luck.